I'd just like to try to clear up a little old business. If we can move through it quickly, we'll do it. If we can't, we'll move it on to new business and move with the school budget. Mr. Fauscher.
That's the there's an item on the
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. This is the authorization for deputy and with Schwab, I believe. Right. So we're just asking for council authorization to approve the resolution that the companies asked for relative to our pension funding transactions. That's all it is.
Amortization of bonds.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. different topic. I don't have the agenda in front of me. The council decision here is whether to allow the open space to be fully funded or not, and the recreation bond to be fully funded for the amounts that are specified in the memo.
that issue was the 230.
At issue was the soccer fields for $230,000 at the 3S property. I got it. Yeah, good. And there's also a question about the grant that the council was involved with for the recreation bond. So, since that grant is unresolved, I would propose that that we reduce the amount for the Green Valley Conservation Easement from $1,280,000, reduce that by $125,000. That way, if the grant comes through at a later date, we won't have to borrow the money in a subsequent borrowing. If the money doesn't come through, then we can tack the $125,000 on to a subsequent open space borrowing. So that way we're not borrowing money that we have to pay interest on that we didn't need if the grant comes through. So that's what I would recommend to the council on the open space.
Don't we need the full 1.155 for the Green Valley portion? So we can't reduce that.
No, not reduce that. The amount that we're going to pay in August is $1,280,000, which is that 1155 plus
Okay.
125. So the general fund will make up the difference if the grant doesn't come through in the meantime. And then we can borrow $125,000 down the road with the next open space bond to replenish the general fund if need be. If the grant comes through, then we borrowed the correct amount by borrowing the $1,155,000.
Just a point of order. Mr. Little will have to recuse himself because he's in a butter.
So those are the questions before the council for the recreation bond amount and the
Mr. President?
open space.
Something.
So, I mean, this is a contract here we're talking about with this, with Green Valley, right?
Yes, this is the agreement that the town has signed on to some time ago.
So we're going to hold off on the grant portion, and how about the recreational portion? We're going to do that?
Well, that's up to the council. There was some discussion about the soccer fields.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this in context of what sort of debt service is going off the books as this new debt service comes on, and you were going to give us the context on how this is going to affect the larger budget.
Yes, and I don't know that I brought that with me.
Were we going to do that when we discuss the debt,
Oh, yeah, I've got that.
Jim? Let me also ask David at the same time, do you need a vote tonight to do this so that you can...
I need to know the bond amount for tomorrow so we can proceed to keep it on track and get the money borrowed before the end of the fiscal year, yes. The total reduction, taking into account the full amount, is because of the drop-off of the Glen borrowing, the net debt service reduction is $237,000.
That's after approving this.
That's after approving the full amounts here. Right.
And do we have to make the decision tonight, too, on the recreational portion?
Yes. That's all part of the bond.
Mr. President, I don't believe that at this time we can afford the additional $230,000. I don't think it's a necessity at this point in time. So I would move that we approve the borrowing for open space and recreation bonds in the amount of $1,980,000, which would
I'll second that for discussion. So what are the implications of not doing the recreational part of the bond?
Well, the two fields are needed, but obviously, in these tough economic times, things like soccer and lacrosse fields don't get built every day. So I think we can certainly explain to the youth groups that would use the fields, why we haven't proceeded with construction. But basically, if we were to proceed, the schedule would be try to construct them in time to plant seed in the early fall. No real expectation that they'd be ready to use next year. We'd probably be looking at the year after next. And there's always that gestation period because we certainly can't afford to bring in sod. So we're talking basically 2 seasons out before the fields would be used.
Okay, so maybe some of this would be eased by the fact that the field's up underneath the wind turbine.
Not really. That's a very small field for practice football. I mean, to be honest, it's not. It's not going to be a field for soccer, lacrosse. Our conflict is really the soccer and lacrosse.
Lacrosse could play there.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
it is a pretty large field.
Yeah, it is. Lacrosse could play. There's grass, there's can be kids, sticks, nets. Yep, I think that's all you need.
I'd just like to speak to it. I'd speak to not approving the 230 because of the position we're in. It's nice to have and get it going, but we're just borrowing money when we really can't afford to borrow it.
So what would the debt service be just on the 230 part?
The principal would be 230 divided by 15, which I don't have my calculator here with me,
Okay, so
and then 5% of the unpaid balance,
maybe 12, 13 grand a year.
in that order, right?
Okay. I'm ready to vote.
All right, we need a motion then for the,
He motioned, did I
He
second?
motioned, he seconded.
so the total then will be...
1.98 million, I believe,
That's correct.
if my Portsmouth High math skills are okay.
You're right.
Probably not.
Probably not. Thanks.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimously.
Thank you.
School budget, Mr. Carpenter, would you like to say a few words, and Superintendent? Welcome you to the discussion of the budget.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. I'm just going to introduce thank you for having us here tonight to present the budget. The budget will be primarily presented by Mr. Buttermeyer, who chairs the Finance Subcommittee. Dr. Lucy and Mr. Dunham will be doing the bulk of the presentation, and then certainly we'll be available for questions. So, Mike?
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the Town Council. My part is also brief. As Mr. Carpenter had mentioned, the bulk of the presentation will be done by Mr. Dunham. I'll quickly run through the introduction and the overview of how we came about with our budget. Through a series of 6 finance meetings from February through March, we covered items such as IT facilities, the elementary schools, the middle and high schools, teaching, learning, student support, and of course salaries and benefits and services and contracts. We had individual meetings and presentations dedicated to those topics, and once those meetings were concluded, we developed a finalized budget, and our budget was then presented to the school committee and passed on a vote of 5-1 with 1 abstention. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Dunham as he will go into the nuts and bolts and all the fun details. My apologies.